Yeah, this morning we're going to finish the series that we started a few weeks ago that we've been calling Kaleo. Kaleo is a Greek word that you'll find all throughout the New Testament that talks about what it means to be called to be a follower of Jesus. What is the calling on each one? About, very much in line with what I just said about, evangelism. What does it mean to make disciples? What's that calling, right? And this whole verse, I think, if you've been around and you've heard people preach on this before, you may have heard this before, kind of hinges on the word go. Like, what does go mean in this particular case? Is it a commandment? Like, get at it, therefore, get her done. Go out and make disciples. No, it's not a commandment. In this particular case, it's much ins and outs of the world that you live in. You're called to make disciples. What is a disciple? Because is it just showing up at church? No, it's so much more than just being an attendee. It's so much more than even just being a learner of what's in the Bible or a learner of who Jesus was. It's way more than just putting a bumper sticker with a fish on the back of your car, which I don't do because then people would know that I was a Christian when I was speeding and cutting them off on the highway. And that's not a good witness, so if you're a driver like me, don't put a fish on the back of your car, okay? You don't need one to be a disciple of Jesus. It has something to do with learning. Obviously, it has something to do with, being a student. But the idea is that it's not just study, but it's following. And it's being an adherent of a way of life defined by Jesus, an imitator of who Jesus was. And that's where this word Christian comes from in the first place, which, by the way, was like a derogatory comment in the first century. When it first started to get used, oh, look at you little Christs. Because Jesus wasn't a well-respected guy in the community that he grew up in, right? He was a rabble-rouser. He was a rebel. He created problems for the religious establishment, right? So being a little Jesus was not a compliment when it first came out. But this idea of being a disciple is this idea of imitating the way that Jesus lived his life. There are other biblical examples that you could think about if you're familiar with biblical stories. Elisha became a disciple of Elijah. He wanted to live just like him, be just like him. You could think about Naomi and Ruth. Wherever you go and whatever you do, I'm going to follow you. I'm going to be there with you. I'm going to learn the rhythm of your life. And of course, in the New Testament, we've been talking about over the last number of weeks, the relationship between Paul and Timothy, where Timothy follows Paul to learn how to imitate Paul as Paul imitates Christ. We'll talk about that verse a little bit more. A disciple of Jesus wants to give in every way their life to him. In every way, they want to make their life like the life of Jesus. And so the calling to therefore go and make disciples is like, as you live your life, demonstrate the values of Jesus to everyone. And I want to say something that I think is really important, because sometimes we think that discipleship is only happening to and for people who are already convinced, right? Discipleship starts the minute that you accept Jesus into your heart. I don't think that's true at all. I think discipleship is happening all the time for everyone. You know, we are being discipled, we're making disciples from various points of view, but as a Christ follower, your life is saying something to the unconvinced around you. You have the opportunity right? And on the far side, on the -10, I don't even know who you put in there. Hitler? Like, is that -10 for humanity? You know, in terms of how far could you be from the heart of God? I don't even know, but it's where it's like, I am going to choose to live my life for Christ. As you live in front of somebody who might be at the, I don't know, these are arbitrary numbers. You know, 80% of all statistics are made up. So, you know, somebody who's at number, you know, -2, right? Like for them, they've decided, yeah, there's a God. This can't be all one cosmic accident. This cannot be, my life is not a number in some great equation that has been going since that explosion. Pushing the universe out. Okay, I've gotten beyond that. I've gotten to intelligent design. Good, but I don't understand Jesus. As you articulate your faith, as you live out your faith, you might help that person. Not just something, as we imitate Jesus, it's not only speaking to people who are already convinced. It's speaking about our life as stay-at-home dads, as we go about our life as corporate working moms, as we go about our lives as soccer coaches and hockey coaches and volunteers in our community. Every single one of us is called to make disciples along the way. You know, I got a text message a couple weeks ago from one of my neighbors, and you know, our adventure with our house has been well documented here. One of the first things we had to do when we moved in a few years ago was get rid of this deck that was absolutely rotting and try to clean up the street from me. And Aaron and I just started talking, and he asked why I was here, and I told him about my job at the church. And you know, I think Aaron felt safe in our conversation, and you know, he was expressing how happy he was to see somebody move in and actually take care of the property. His life. I think the first time we talked, he talked for like 45 minutes, and he told me everything I needed to know about his family in the first 45 minutes. I've come to know that that's just really typical for Aaron, you know. But Aaron told us all about his family and whatnot. We built a little relationship just because we were neighbors. And we were cleaning up the yard, and we were trying to make our neighborhood, you know, the best that it could be. That text message I got from Aaron's wife a couple of weeks ago, as we're moving out of the neighborhood, she's like, "Can you remind me what time your church meets?" I said, "It would be so great to see you here some Sunday morning." She hasn't come yet. But guys, like just sharing life with Aaron was discipleship toward Aaron and his family, right? It's not as complicated as sometimes we make it out to be. And too often, I think we're waiting for someone else to do the work of discipleship. Can I tell you something? It's not the church's job to discipleship. If by that you mean like us professional people who work here at the church. It is the church's job, like you guys are the church, right? Discipleship is something that we share, a calling that we share. It is not just for the paid professionals. It's for all of us. When I talk to people about making disciples, I find that there are two really common objections to that idea. The first one sounds like this: I'm not ready. I'm not ready to be a disciple maker. I don't know enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not educated enough. I didn't go to Bible school. I can't lead a Bible study about the book of Revelation and help people make sense of it. Yeah, that's a tough one. Incidentally, I got a book recommendation for you. There's a new book out called Revelation for the Rest of Us by Scott McKnight. If you've ever kind of wondered what is this thing at the end of the Bible and been very confused by it, you should read this book. It's super duper helpful. That's bonus material. It's not really part of this today. But you know what? Here's the thing. Every single one of you has things in your life that God has taught you as you're going that you could share with somebody else to help make disciples. This is the audience participation part of the message this morning, okay? You ready for this? Some of you got very nervous. How many of you would say that, for the most part, you have a godly marriage? You're pursuing God together. It doesn't mean that you have a perfect marriage or that we're trying to set anybody up on a pedestal, but you've been at this a little while and you're trying to make God the center of your marriage. How many of you would say that? Put up your hand. Okay? Great. A whole bunch of you. A whole bunch of you dudes had to look at your wives before you put up your hand, which was really funny. It's like, is it okay? Is that us? Is that okay? Is that okay? How many of you would say that at the place that you work, the people that you work with, know that you're a Christian and that witness is largely intact? People don't think you're a total, insert your own adjectives, because I'll get myself in trouble if I insert mine. Okay, fantastic. Whole bunch of you. How many of you have practiced prayer in your life for a significant period of time and feel like maybe if I had to articulate to somebody what prayer was about, I could tell somebody about prayer? Awesome. How many of you would consider that you've, sort of dedicated yourself to studying the Bible and might be able to help somebody else understand the Bible a little bit? Great. How many of you have children that you would say, I've made enough mistakes to help somebody else avoid making mistakes? Fantastic. How many of you think that you're actually pretty good with your personal finances to the point that you're kind of living, mostly debt-free and not burdened and under your means and, all those kinds of things? You might be able to help somebody else learn about their finances. Great. A few less of you. Yeah, that was a setup. How many of you are like me and just feel like sometimes actually you find yourself most comfortable when you're in the presence of a bunch of non-believers? Right. Okay. Here's the deal. If you said yes to one of those things, stand up. If you said yes to any of those things, stand up. Larry, I'm looking at you. I know you said yes to at least one of those. Look around the room. It's like practically pretty close to everyone. Go ahead and have a seat. I want you, in that moment, as you look around and see that the church, the people of the church have been equipped to disciple others. I think God wants you to feel that and know that and believe that and live out of that. It is your calling. You've been gifted, you've been equipped, you've been taught so that you can equip and teach others. It's your calling. Sometimes I have heard this around the time of our men's retreat. The way that we present ministry is quite young, and so that makes it feel like maybe if I'm a little more educated in time, if I'm more advanced in years, then maybe maybe this isn't for me. And I want you to know, if that's you here, anyone less educated in time than you are, we need you. We need your wisdom. We need your perspective. We need you to come and connect with us and to help us grow and to show us ways that we just aren't going to figure things out on our own. We need you. We need, as Paul talks to Timothy in 1 Corinthians, spiritual mothers and fathers. You know what the other objection is? And this one's a little bit more subtle because people usually don't say this to your face, especially Canadians, because we're so polite. But the vibe is, I don't need to be discipled. I don't really need that in my life. I've been doing this for a while. I think I got a pretty good grip on it. I don't need anybody to disciple me. Do you know, it's funny. I think that's so far off the mark. Did you ever notice that the more sophisticated and advanced you get in an area, the actual more teaching and input, the more specialized training you end up needing? Think about that in your professional life for a quick second. The better you get at your job, the more highly specialized the training that comes along with it, right? Am I wrong here? The same thing is true in your Christian life. You know, like having no coaches or one coach, that's what little league teams are like. You know, when guys are just trying to figure out how to put the bat on the ball and not run to third instead of first, right? As you progress through the course of becoming athletic in the way of baseball, well, you gain more coaches, right? So when I was in high school and I was playing softball, you know, we got 2 assistant coaches. So the head coach could do one job and the assistant coaches could help out in other areas of the field. You know, let's say generally speaking, offense and defense. Have you watched a professional baseball game lately? How many coaches are on a baseball team? Like there's one at every base. Just to help guys run from first to second. And then there's a bench coach. I don't actually know what he does. He just sits there and looks really smart. You know, because there's the head coach. He makes all the decisions. The bench coach is there, I don't know, to like give his opinion. The pitching coach is there on the bench to help the head coach know whether the pitcher needs to come in or out. And then there's a whole bunch of coaches down in the bullpen to help out all the pitchers that are down there. The more sophisticated you get in an area, the more coaching and help that you need. So followers of Jesus who have been on the journey for a while, you still need to be discipled. You just need more disciple makers in your life, right? You should probably have somebody who can help you with family management. You should probably have somebody in your life who can help you with financial management. You should probably have somebody in your life who can help you learn and understand the Bible. You should probably have somebody in your life who can learn and help you to learn how to pray better. You see my point? Like, nobody retires from being discipled. And nobody retires from making disciples. Maybe we've just made it way too complicated. Maybe the problem is we're so bogged down in all the things that discipleship might mean that we get tied up in knots and we don't know where to start. Can I tell you the easiest thing to do? Start living life with somebody else. This is the oh-so-common pitch towards something like a life group. I've been so encouraged lately that there are a number of people here who are remembering the value of doing life together in life groups. You know what? The simplest definition, if we wanted to boil this whole discipleship thing down to what does it mean to make disciples in a way a grade 2 student could understand, we would say we help people find Jesus and grow in him. And all that's really required for that, to have the opportunity to do it, is to be connected to people. And yet somehow I think we know this. I think we feel it. I think we intuit. I think we know that we need to have community and engagement and development in our life, and we make it such a low priority. If you're struggling to know how to make disciples, how to do that, how to live the life. I can tell you a couple of quick things that might help you out. The first thing that you could do as you get together with other people and you live next to people is embrace the idea that you are going to set an example for others. Paul in Philippians 3:17 says this, "Join together in following my example, brothers and sisters. Just as you have us as a model, keep your eyes on those who live as we do." So Paul is telling the people that he's writing to, look, you need to see the life that I'm living and imitate me. Sometimes we understand this. You know, when Melissa and I were first married, we met this young couple, Jason and Ashley. Jason and Ashley had been married maybe a year or two before we were. I don't even know if it was that long. But they seemed further ahead in life because they had their stuff together. They owned a house, and had a real job. I was still working at a music store, which is not a real job, And Melissa, maybe you were with WestJet at the time, so that was kind of a real job. So maybe I was the outlier in this particular case. But they just seemed to have done marriage a little bit together and been a little further down life than we were. We spent a whole bunch of time with them. Godly people pursuing Jesus. And we just wanted to know. Jason was the first person that told me it wasn't okay to steal music off the internet. Remember when Napster was a thing? Who remembers Napster? Just like thievery, right? Like somebody made that intellectual property and then we all just went around stealing it and thinking that, oh, it's digital music, it must be free. Nobody had to pay to make that, it seems simple to us now because we have really easy things like Spotify. Back then, when digital music was first, we would take, and then Napster allowed you to download software for free too, which of course didn't cost anybody anything and wasn't a crime at all. Jason was just like a real adult, and he helped me become a real adult and taught me some really, really simple things. We need people to set an example for us, to learn what it means in every area of our life. I know that doesn't have very much to do with Jesus, although maybe it had everything to do with Jesus. My morality was pretty low at the time. We need people to help us along the way. Paul says it a little bit differently in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. He says, "Imitate me as I imitate Christ." Follow my example is another way that he said it, as I follow the example of Christ. This is the fundamental work of discipleship that we're all called to. Parents, can I remind you that the most important job you have is to disciple your kids? Our kids are going to grow up in the environment that we create. Youth group. I wish more people would bring their kids to youth group because I see what Kaleo and her team do in the one-on-one investment that they make with kids and the benefit that has been in the life of our kids and in my family. I think it's amazing that a whole lot of you have decided to send your kids to Christian school because they get to spend time with teachers who are of the same value as you, and that helps. But guess what? Neither of those things is a substitute for your own discipleship in the life of your family. You cannot farm out the discipleship of your family. So the priorities you set at home will be the priorities that they learn. The places you spend time, the things that you go. And if you look at culture in the world, right? What are the most important things? Getting a really good grade in algebra. That's a really big priority. Or becoming really good at something that's not even a real sport, like baseball. Hockey. Praise the Lord. Yeah, the Leafs won this morning already, by the way, so it's going to be a good day no matter what else happens. Praise Jesus. They're all playing in Europe right now, in case you... Okay. The things that we set in our households will become the My mom was petrified that I might become like Bart Simpson. Because you remember in the early days of The Simpsons, it was all about Bart. And he's just this indignant little preteen character that, my mom was certain if I watched The Simpsons that I would become just like Bart. And she wasn't wrong. This is the hard part of becoming adult. I hated it at the time because my friends were all watching it. They knew all the cool things to say to each other, or the uncool things to say to each other as it would be for grade school. And I realize now, I'm like, Mom, you're so smart because you're exactly right. Every movie I watch that I think is funny, I memorize line for line. I would know so much of The Simpsons if I was allowed to watch it as a child. And that's kind of funny and it's a bit innocuous, but what I didn't realize at the time was that my mom was just trying to make sure that the right things got into my head more often than the wrong things. I think that's our job, moms and dads. The example that we set in our households is our calling. It is discipleship. If you're a follower of Jesus and you have a family at home, your number one ministry field is with that family. You are called to make disciples. You can help people disciple as setting an example. The last thing I'll say is that your words have power and they have weight. Yes, do the right things, but say the right things. Encourage the right behaviors. Call the right things out. I will admit, this is actually not something that I'm good at. I don't find it natural to give verbal praise. It's something that I continue to have to work on in my life. But I've seen the power of it when other people who are good at it have practiced it on me. It has changed the course of my life. The first church I ever worked at, I realized about a year and a half in that I had chosen the wrong place to work. My boss said to me in a private meeting once, my boss being our lead pastor, I really don't think that adults come to faith very often. I think we're better to spend our energy on kids because kids make decisions for Jesus more often. It is true that kids make decisions for Jesus more often, but I couldn't wrap my head around a faith that wasn't absolutely sold out to the idea that people could change. That Jesus could change an adult life just like he could change the trajectory of a child's life. And so that led me on a path to try to think about what comes next in my ministry life, because I know that it's just too high of a value for me to stay here forever. And in all that questioning, Melissa and I had this crazy, maybe it was mostly me, had this crazy idea that maybe God was calling us to start a church from scratch, or this weird thing called church planting. If you haven't heard, the idea is you take a seed and you put it in the ground and, something grows up over time. And so I went to the denominational family that I was a part of at the time, and I asked them, I said, hey, I think maybe God is calling me to do this. How do I know? They're like, oh, it's great. We have an assessment process that you can take. I was like, wow, it's amazing. So they put me through the process. I had to answer a whole bunch of quizzes and have a couple of interviews and, do a bunch of work. And I don't know, about a month after I connected, they scheduled a meeting with me and basically to let me down gently and say, hey, we don't think that you're going to be a church planter. Okay. I didn't really know what it is anyway, but I think what they were looking for at the time was in that generation, there was a certain church that was coming out of Chicago that was like everybody was copying that church, and their pastor was a 40-year-old ex-businessman, who had all this, personal charisma, and when they told me I wasn't that person, I was like, man, I'm only 27 years old and I'm not very charismatic, so, okay, cool. It's not for me. About a month after that, I had been moving on with my life, and I got a phone call from a gentleman named Craig Whitney, who worked for the group that actually did the assessment, okay? So the assessment was farmed out to another group of people. And he calls me and he says, hey, I just wanted to know, like, did you fill this out for us? Or did you fill it out for somebody else? Like there was a paperwork problem. We didn't have the right box ticked at the end. You know, we did this for somebody else. Pass it along and don't think about it again. And I said, oh, I did it for my denomination. And he said, well, what did they say to you? I said, well, they just told me that I wasn't the kind of guy that they were. To connect with us. And the time that we spent with Craig was just so encouraging. He became a coach of mine for years and years and years later. And I tell you that story to say, guys, you never know when something as simple as like, I see this in you, will change the course of somebody's life. That's discipleship. Being somebody who easily shares positive feedback, lets people know that you see potential in them, calls it out of them and asks them to live in it. That is discipleship. And you are called to do that. There are so many of you in here who don't have. I just want to spend a couple minutes as we wrap up praying for you, praying for our church, praying for our community. I need to invite the band to come back, and we're going to sing a song in a minute. But in the meantime, would you guys all just bow your heads, close your eyes with me, and let's go before the Lord. Jesus, I just want to say this morning that you are the most valuable thing in my life. And you deserve so much more than I normally give. In my attention. Because with you is life. And you have called all of us to share that life with others. To be about more than just ourselves, to be about the future of your kingdom as we disciple our children. God, help us to be smart about the things that we prioritize for our families. You've called us, Jesus, to share you with the people that we interact with on an everyday basis, in small, sometimes imperceptible ways, as we just go about the practice of being faithful in small things. God, help us to be an effective example to the people who are watching us. Clean up our yards. Go about our business on a day-to-day basis. Order a cup of coffee. Be the uniquely kind person that comes through that day. Help us to find ways to be an example for you in our everyday comings and goings. And God, help me, help us to have words to encourage the people around us. Help us to speak life into the lives of those that we come in contact with. And Jesus, as a church, help us to have a heart to make disciples. Help us to find those people that we can live life with so that we can be an example to them when they just need a little bit of help understanding what the next step might be. Help all of us to be really great examples to the kids that are running around this building. to the families that are a part of our community. Help us to help them fall in love with you and your kingdom and your church. God, stir up in us a passion for the things you've called us to. Help us find the people that we can do life with. Help us to take a step across the room and just invite somebody into relationship. And help us to do all of this because it's what you do. It's what you've done for us. Help us to make our lives about your incarnation and your sacrifice, your death and your resurrection on behalf of those of us who just don't deserve it. Help us to follow your example well, Jesus. We ask in your name. Amen.